called me from the ashes, you have broken every curse. Blessed Redeemer, you have set this captive free. Lord, I can't help but sing. Faithful you are, faithful forever you will be. Faithful you are. All your promises are yes and amen. All your promises are yes and amen. I will rest in your promises. My confidence is your faithfulness. I will rest in your promises. My confidence is your faithfulness. I will rest in your promises. My confidence is your faithfulness. I will rest in your promises. My confidence is your faithfulness. Faithful you are, faithful forever you will be. Faithful you are. All your promises are yes and amen. All your promises are yes and amen. Who am I that the highest King would welcome me? I was lost, but he brought me in. Oh, his love for me. Oh, his love for me. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. Free at last he has ransomed me. His grace runs deep. While I was a slave to sin, Jesus died for me. Yes, he died for me. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. Oh, I am who you say I am. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am.
Welcome to this new series that we're calling Mighty Men and Wise Women. We want to look in the Bible about how to grow our faith, how to increase our faith, how to be more effective, and how to be more powerful in the kingdom of heaven. You see, Jesus called us on purpose with a purpose, that is, to be His family, to be His kingdom, to be His church. And like He says in Matthew 16, verse 18, upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it. So Jesus calls the church His eternal purpose for defeating death, which is man's first and final enemy, and in so doing, defeat Satan's grasp upon the souls of others. So the church is Christ's great work. And so we need to grow to be mighty in strength and wise in our spirit. Now, I invite you to turn in your Bibles to Romans chapter 12 as we jump into this. Romans chapter 12, there's a verse here and a concept that is the centerpiece of this thought. It is about the importance of the relationship that we build in the kingdom, not only with the Lord, but with one another. Right after the opening verses of Romans 12, where Paul talks about our sacrificing ourselves, putting ourselves on the altar, then what comes next is how we are then integrated together in a body, different gifts or different abilities, but integrated together in the body for His purpose. And the verse we're thinking about now is verse 10, but let me start with verse 9, where Paul says, "Let love be without hypocrisy, abhor what is evil, cling to what is good." So be real, be authentic, be genuine, don't be drifting off in an opposite direction. And then he says this in verse 10, "Be devoted to one another in brotherly love." And the way he writes that and words that, it's connected. It's not a separate thought, that this is what it means for love to be without hypocrisy. Because hypocrisy is a claim that is unsubstantiated, a statement that isn't lived out. It's not genuine. It's fake. So a love, we talked about in the previous lesson, it's not just ooey-gooey emotions, that it is a commitment, that it is a conviction, that it is an intensity. And so to love one another without hypocrisy, for it to be real, what do you mean, Paul? What does that look like? He says, be devoted to one another, and then he uses the term brotherly love. Now, we also noticed a verse, turn if you would to Philippians chapter 2, where Paul perhaps expands on this some more, or at least shows us an example in his life when he mentions two relationships that he has that exemplifies this. One is Timothy in chapter 2, beginning in verse 19, but we're going to just quickly in review notice three things that he said about his relationship with Epaphroditus. So in verse 25, he says, as Philippians chapter 2, verse 25, he says, "But I thought it necessary to send to you Epaphroditus, my brother and fellow worker and fellow soldier, who was also your messenger and minister to my need." And he goes on to talk about how important Epaphroditus is, how much Paul loves him, how brokenhearted he would be if he were to be separated from him because of Epaphroditus' illness that might have almost led to death, etc. When Paul's describing this powerful relationship, much like with Timothy, he talked about common purpose. He called Timothy a kindred spirit. Epaphroditus, he says three things. Number one, he's a brother. And at least in my mind, that describes the kind of relationship. The idea of brother sounds to me like loyal. A brother is someone that's with you all the way. Number two, he calls him a fellow worker. So that means that Epaphroditus is loyal. That also means he's reliable. That they have done projects, they have gone out, they have done things together, and Epaphroditus is there. He's not going to abandon Paul. Paul can count on him. So we got loyal, and we got reliable. And then thirdly, he says, my fellow soldier. Now that means that their relationship has been in places that are hazardous or that there is risk involved. Because with the word soldier, you have to think of the word fight or the word war, the word struggle. And so that is a different and unique kind of relationship when men fight together, when they take risks together, when they go to war together. That's a unique relationship. So Paul describes a man who is loyal to him, a man who is reliable, and a man who will fight with him, shoulder to shoulder. Got his back no matter what. Today we might think of the idea of a fellow soldier. We might think about a wingman, about someone that has your back, someone that's gonna take care of you if you get into a scrape, etc., that they're always going to be for you. And that's what makes such a relationship so powerful. Now, one of my favorite examples of this kind of relationship is found in the Old Testament, and I invite you to turn your Bibles there to 1 Samuel chapter 14. This is always a powerful account to me of how relationships are built and how God works through them and what he accomplishes in them. So while you're turning to 1 Samuel chapter 14, let's think about, brother, fellow worker, fellow soldier. So we get from that at least the ideas of loyalty, reliability, and a willingness to fight, right? You could call that somebody that you can count on. Obviously, loyal is similar. So I'm gonna use the word faithful. I mean, you can trust that they're there. They're faithful. So you have trust in them that come what may. When it starts getting hard or difficult, you know they're going to be there. You trust them with your life, we say. So loyal, reliable, faithful. Those are some powerful keys to some deep relationships. Now, in 1 Samuel chapter 14, King Saul is early into his reign as king, and he has a son named Jonathan. Jonathan is a part of his army, a part of Saul, his father's army. And it is a time when Israel is struggling. They're besieged by the Philistines. They are struggling with a lack of confidence, a lack of faith. There's a timidity about the Israelites. They haven't learned yet to trust God enough. And so in that background, Jonathan stands out like a bright light or a shining star. The first verse of chapter 14. Now the day came that Jonathan the son of Saul said to the young man who was carrying his armor, "Come, let us cross over to the Philistines' garrison that is on the other side." And he doesn't tell Saul. It's just something he's going to do by himself. So this young man that carries his armor, or someone who's called an armor bearer, is an interesting role. It is a supportive role. So Jonathan, of course, is going to be the warrior, the lead. He's leading the charge. And so an armor bearer's job was to carry other weapons, but it's not just like it's not like a golf caddy, when maybe a bad guy comes running at Jonathan and the armor bearer says, "Well, sir, looking at the size of that Philistine, I would recommend the short sword. Given the wind, I would say you slash from right to left," right? That may be a golf caddy. That's not exactly an armor bearer. It is true that he's going to be carrying additional weapons or equipment to help Jonathan carry the load, but he's also got Jonathan's back literally. He's going to cover for him. He's his wingman. I think it's interesting in aviation how the importance of a wingman was driven home through the First World War, so that by the Second World War, the idea of the wingman and covering one another was pretty well established doctrine. The difficulty with an airplane is they would try to put a mirror here or a mirror there, but you just don't have any visibility behind you. Just the nature of the structure of the aircraft and the way the pilots are seated. They have excellent vision forward, to the sides, and to some extent down forward, but there are blind spots. You can't see directly below you, depending on the configuration of the airplane, but generally speaking, they can't see straight below them because of the wings, and they can't look right behind them. They can't get turned around that far because they need to be concentrating on flying. And even if they do get turned all around, there's the tail back there. And those are essential parts of the airplane, so you can't remove them and you can't make them out of glass. So there's a surprising number of blind spots for a pilot. Given that in those days, World War II, for example, that air-to-air combat was all visual. They had to see the enemy, which would have been a speck, and then close the distance, figure out the three-dimensional geometry problem to get in the right position, etc., in order to engage. So having a blind spot was absolutely lethal. So If you had a lead plane flying, then he always had a wingman, a word that literally means a man on your wing flying right off, and depending on, it can be in different places, but it's very often off of the right wingtip. And then, of course, they'll move around given whatever the circumstances might be. The point of a wingman is he has your 6 o'clock, your back. He's covering your blind spots. He's watching you from a perspective that you cannot see from. So he'll be able to see an enemy come up on you. He'll be able to see if something's wrong with the aircraft. You develop an oil leak, a hydraulic leak, some sort of problem. He's going to be able to see it because, again, the pilot can't see anything of the outside of his aircraft. So a wingman's job is to stick with his flight leader no matter what. The loyalty in that is written in blood. If a wingman gets distracted or gets tempted and peels off on his own, he leaves his flight leader vulnerable and could be shot down. Now, what's interesting is over time, these crews develop such a powerful bond and taking care of one another. Because if you're thinking through this, there's a problem. Doesn't the wingman need a wingman? Doesn't the wingman have the same blind spots behind him that the flight leader does? And the answer is yes. But there's such a commitment to the mission. The lead plane is the lead plane. It is his job to complete the mission, whatever that might be, dropping the bomb or doing whatever it is that he's supposed to be doing. That means the wingman's job is to take whatever hits he has to protect the lead plane to get the job done. Now that's an intense kind of loyalty. There have been instances, for example, in demonstration teams like the Blue Angels or the Thunderbirds where they're doing aerobatics for a crowd, and so there'd be a multi-ship formation, same thing. You got the lead plane who's doing all the maneuvers and everybody else is locked in on whatever position they're supposed to be in, because where the lead plane is out looking, the wingman is watching the wingtip and making sure he's in the right position and covering the lead plane. So there have been examples where the lead plane flew too low to the ground, and in his pullout, the planes behind him in formation flew into the ground because they never saw it coming because their eyes were only on the lead plane. That's the kind of intensity, the kind of loyalty, and the kind of focus that such relationships develop. So an armor bearer is a wingman, not just a fellow that might suggest which weapon. He's carrying some extra equipment, but his job is to protect the lead warrior. And watch how that develops here. But what I really want to emphasize is the relationship they have, what it takes to do what they did together. So Jonathan goes out, doesn't tell anybody. In verse 4, goes over to the Philistine garrison. They're on one crag or high point. Jonathan appears on another. And here's the plan. Here's this. Imagine being the armor bearer. Here's what Jonathan says, verse 6. Then Jonathan said to the young man who was carrying his armor, "Come, let us cross over to the garrison of these uncircumcised." That's a key word. That means these are not men who are in the covenant with God, because that was required to be in the covenant. In fact, God told Abraham, if someone is not circumcised, they've broken the covenant. So that's a very important distinction, those who are in relationship with God and those who are not. Now listen to his language. Come, let us cross over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. Perhaps the Lord will work for us. Now, if you're the armor bearer and you're listening to the plan and you hear maybe God will work for us. Maybe God will be with us. Maybe. What's coming next, what Jonathan's plan is, requires tremendous faith. And it's interesting how Jonathan so humbly says, maybe, perhaps. He's not so presumptuous as to assume that, well, if I plan it, God's going to support it. What he's saying is, I think this is what God would have us do. And there's a humility there. There's an openness there to the leading of the Lord's Spirit. Okay, perhaps the Lord will work for us, for the Lord is not restrained to save by many or by few. So you have a conditional statement followed by a statement of conviction. Okay? His plan, perhaps the Lord will work for us. Maybe this is what God would have us do. That's in humility. That's an openness. That's I could be wrong here. We'll see what God does. But the second statement, the Lord is not limited. He's not constrained. He can use a lot of people or he can use just a few. That's a conviction. See, there's room, and there must be room for conjecture or humility or the perhaps, but perhapses have to rest on conviction. And he's absolutely confident. He's absolutely sure that God is not limited in any way by the numbers of people that help him. Right? It's not like we come a few short and say, oh, well, I guess God's just going to be stuck. Because where he comes from, he comes out of, according to verse 2, about 600 men that's involved in this situation. God could use all of them, some of them, or in this case, Jonathan is saying he can use just us, 2 of us, if he chooses. Now, you're the armor bearer. What kind of plan is that? To say that's risky is an understatement. That's not much of a plan. Let's go over there to them and let's see if God shows up. Well, what happens if he doesn't? Well, that result will be sort of obvious and swift and probably really uncomfortable. Prior to this day, before the crisis or the moment of decision of stepping off the cliff or not, Jonathan has developed his faith in the Lord. The armor bearer has developed his faith in the Lord. And these two already have a relationship that's already been developed over time. If this is his armor bearer, this is not just a random guy carrying a few extra swords in case Jonathan breaks one. These are training partners. This is something that they do. It reminds me of what you see sometimes in terms of a pair of a sniper and a spotter and how they work together, talk to each other in just simple terms, not in anything like warfare. I've been involved in shooting and spotting in terms of competition shooting, and it's important. I have shot before with a spotter that knew me, and I've shot with a spotter that didn't, or a spotter that didn't know what I was doing, had no background for long distance shooting, and it makes a tremendous difference. Because a spotter's looking downrange and he's looking at wind conditions and releases the shooter to wind to fire on the target, and then they fire. Well, if a spotter sees a miss or even a hit, you're looking for patterns and you're grouping pretty well. Or, oh, that one's off. Well, is it off downwind? And that could be explained by perhaps a change in the wind as you're watching the brush or the flags or whatever you're doing. But when you know your shooter and you know each other, it's like, what do you think about that? You can tell if someone's tense or if they hurried, or, in other words, do we need to adjust or do you just need to do it again but stay focused? That's an important difference. That comes from time, is what I'm trying to say. That comes from experience, knowing each other well enough to read each other. Jonathan, the armor bearer, have a really strong connection and relationship, and they would, as they've been doing this. Listen to how the armor bearer answers. In verse 7, he says, his armor bearer said to him, do all that is in your heart. Turn yourself, and I'm with you, according to your desire, or according to your heart's desire. I'm with you. That's simple, but powerful. There's a place here to go, run that by me again. And so what happens if it goes this way, but it might go that way, but then what if they do this, and then how do we do that? There's no conversation here. There's an armor bearer saying, a wingman saying, go for it, and I'm with you all the way. Wherever you go, I'm with you all the way. That's a powerful statement. Do all that is in your heart. Turn yourself, and here I'm with you, according to your desire. Whichever way you go, I'm right there. Right there. Well, then Jonathan reveals the full detail of the plan. In verse 8, Jonathan said, behold, we will cross over to the men and reveal ourselves to them. So we're going to go over, and we're going to pop up and go, hello. Verse 9, if they say to us, wait until we come to you, so they're going to come across the little valley between the two high points, then we'll stand in our place and not go up to them. But if they say, come up to us, then we will go up, for the Lord has given them into our hands, and this shall be the sign to us. All right, let's think this through. So they're on two different high points. Jonathan and armor bearers over here, Philistines are over here, and there's a sharp ravine between them. So they're close enough that they can communicate, yell at each other, but far enough they're too far to engage. So somebody's going to have to cross. So what's the plan? Okay, we're going to reveal ourselves, and if they say, y'all just stay right there and we'll come over. So the second piece is, if they say, you come over to us, we'll know God is with us. So shouldn't you say, if they say, we'll come to you, right, that means God is not with us, right, according to the sign they're looking for? So if they get the opposite sign, if they get the, no, we'll come to you, then shouldn't the plan be, and while they're coming down, we're going to turn tail and we're going to get out of here? Right? But you see how Jonathan says we're all in? Because if it's not God's plan and they come, we're going to stay right here. Well, so they're outnumbered big time. The other thing that's interesting is how inverted this is. Because to go down the crag and then across the ravine, as they start drawing nearer, they're climbing up this sharp crag or outcropping or high point. So that means the Philistines would have the high ground. So any arrows they want to shoot, spears they want to throw, or even rocks they want to chuck, puts Jonathan and his armor bearer at a great disadvantage. And the climb is likely fairly intense. If it requires both hands, and it's likely that it does, then they're going to climb up the hill unarmed. The sword's going to be in its sheath. He won't have it in his hand. He certainly won't have room for a sword in one hand, shield in the other. So the disadvantage would be on the person climbing up. So see, I would say, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have them come over, and while they're coming up, we'll get after them and get as many of them as we can, as long as we can. That would make sense. But Jonathan purposely flips it that the most risky path will be the one that God has chosen. It reminds me of Peter. You remember how they're in the boat and they're in the storm and they see Jesus walking in the water and they think he's a ghost, and so they're all afraid? You remember what Peter asks? Now, what would make sense? Lord, if it's you, come to us here in the boat. Or better, Lord, if it's you, still the waters, calm the storm. He's already done that, so let's just do that again. That would be good for everybody. You talk about a win-win. But you remember what Peter said, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water. That's the worst plan ever, worst case scenario. Like, that's the riskiest path of all. That's what Peter chooses. That's what Jonathan chooses. Why? It would seem that they are choosing a sign or opening a door for God to act in a way that makes it abundantly clear that God is acting. It removes any other possibility. With great risk comes great clarity. So it can't be any questions of, man, I sure was on today. Man, I don't think I missed with one arrow. Or, man, we sure were lucky that they were coming up and I was able to chunk that rock. Or, my, what a coincidence. Or, knock on wood and all the other silly things that clouds the clarity to see the hand of God. So Jonathan chooses a path that would make God's work, God's deliverance, abundantly crystal clear. Well, there's the plan. So verse 11, they revealed themselves to the garrison of the Philistines, and the Philistines said, "Behold, Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they have hidden themselves." And so the men of the garrison hailed Jonathan and his armor bearer, and they say, "Come up to us, and we'll tell you something." There's that arrogance, there's that mocking, because nobody's going to come up to them. That's a taunt. So imagine when Jonathan says, "We're coming." That is not what anyone would expect. Then Jonathan climbed up on his hands and his feet. So there you go. No sword in the hand, shield in the other. Hands and feet, absolutely vulnerable, wide open. With his armor bearer where? Right behind him. Right where he said he would be. You turn and I'm there. Every time you turn, I'm going to be right there. You turn, I'm going to be right there. You're never going to have your back uncovered. And that young armor bearer is coming up right behind Jonathan. Nobody's going to sneak up on Jonathan without getting through the armor bearer. Jonathan climbed up on his hands and feet with his armor bearer behind them, and they fell before Jonathan, and his armor bearer put some to death after him. I mean, when they come up, Jonathan went to work, and I mean, he went right through them so that the armor bearer's having to protect him behind him because he's moving so fast. Jonathan doesn't have a wall to back up and make sure nobody can get behind him. That's the armor bearer's job. And in verse 15, there was a trembling in the camp, in the field, and among all the people. Even the garrison and the raiders trembled, and the earth quaked, so that it became a great trembling. What did Jonathan say? The Lord is not restricted. He's not constrained to work by many or a few. He can work through two of us if he chooses to. We're not going to put God in a box. We're not going to play games. We're not going to demand that God follows our lead. Rather, we're trying to follow God's lead. And Jonathan does it with an armor bearer. It's such a powerful story of God's deliverance and God using two brave and faithful men. But in our study, the phrase that really has my attention is verse 7. And his armor bearer said to him, "Do all that is in your heart, turn yourself, and I'm with you according to your desire." Can you imagine what we can do in the Lord when we have those kind of relationships with each other, with someone? Contrast to the backbiting, the grumbling, the biting and devouring one another, the distractions, the fussings, all the carryings on. You can't get anywhere if you're in constant turmoil. I think this is one of the finest, and maybe this makes sense more to me than it might some of the ladies, but I also think this is a tremendous picture of marriage. And there's so much here about faithfulness and about loyalty and about having each other's back and all that sort of stuff. That's something to contemplate, which is a little outside the scope of this particular focus. But the armor bearer said, wherever you go, I'm there. So you see what we want to focus on? Okay, so I think most of us probably see that and are like that. Yeah, that would be powerful. And maybe we have it. Maybe we don't. I want to tell you in the next lesson about just a relationship that I have like that and how long it took and what it took to develop it. But there's this idea that we're going to talk about a lot about how we develop these kinds of relationships, partnerships, and the difference that it makes. And it's this principle that one of my spiritual mentors, if you will, taught me a long time ago. I should have written this sideways. I could have used more of the paper. Truth over time develops trust. Being able to speak truth to one another and do it over time, consistently, reliably, creates profound and important trust. The only way that Jonathan and the armor bearer could accomplish what they did is if they had absolute trust in God. Truth over time. They heard His truth, lived out His truth over time. It didn't happen overnight. I think that's part of our society is we're kind of wanting to microwave it. Like, okay, yeah, where do I sign up to get one of those? It's a process. They had tremendous faith in God, truth over time. But they also had tremendous faith in one another. So Paul said, Epaphroditus is my brother, so he's loyal. He's my fellow worker, so we've done a lot of stuff together. He's reliable, and he's my fellow soldier. Epaphroditus, I think, could be described as Paul's armor bearer, who could say to Paul, you turn your head, I'm there. Wherever you're going, I'm there. And you think about Timothy, his kindred spirit, Epaphroditus, you think about Titus, you think about Luke, and others. As Paul was going along, they were with him and they stayed with him. You think about Silas, who seems to fairly freshly join up with Paul. He's Paul's young armor bearer in Acts chapter 16, just in time for them both to get arrested, beaten, and thrown into prison. I can almost imagine Silas thinking, I wish I'd have gone with Barnabas. But now imagine their relationship afterwards. And that's one of the examples that we'll spend some more time studying. I invite you to turn finally to John chapter 15. So, the centerpiece verse for our study is that Romans 12, verse 10, be devoted to one another in brotherly love. The concept, I think, is clearly taught by Jesus, and this will be a major verse for us as well in John 15, when he says in verse 12, this is my commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. There's that word love again. And I'm making the point, I think that we have a distorted view, that the world has a very different view, and that affects us, and we don't. So then when we have disagreements or when we have troubles, there goes the relationships. We don't build something deep, perhaps. This is my commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, than one lay down his life for his friends. It's that sacrificial life. You are my friends if you do what I command you. Jesus calls us to be friends. We've got a lot to talk about. The clock always seems to run out too soon. But when we think about Jonathan as armor bearer, and his perhaps the Lord will be with us, but either way, we're going to go. We think about loyalty, reliability, and faithfulness. So let me ask you this question. When's the last time you've taken a risk for the kingdom? When's the last time you have chosen something inconvenient, uncomfortable, and unpredictable for the sake of serving the Lord? When we are willing to do those things together, changes everything. Changes everything. We'll talk about truth over time develops trust some more. May God bless you as you think about what risky hilltop is God calling you to abandon for another one inhabited by enemies.
The ground began to shake, the stone was rolled away. His perfect love could not be overcome. Now death, where is your sting? Our resurrected King has rendered you defeated. Forever He is glorified. Forever He is lifted high. Forever He is risen. He is alive. He is alive. We sing hallelujah. We sing hallelujah. We sing hallelujah. The Lamb is overcome. We sing hallelujah. We sing hallelujah. We sing hallelujah. The Lamb is overcome. Forever He is glorified. Forever He is lifted high. Forever He is risen. He is alive. He is alive.